Scientists and geneticists like geneticist David-Reich claim that surprising and extreme arrivals and population turnover events occurred in Europe and across Western Eurasia just 4,500 years ago. Just 4,500 years ago, most of the arrivals in Europe and Western Eurasia carry a totally new Y-DNA haplogroup R1b, so they are immigrants, and they are not native Europeans and not native Eurasians. By the time these scientists and geneticists like David-Reich came to this conclusion by means of ancient DNA, consensus had already been telling us this for over at least 100 years that all humans, including all Europeans, have African origin. Almost all publications kept repeating this, and we are all kind of impregnated with it, and this is so until today. We suppose that since the African origin hypothesis seems to be the most convenient for consensus, and at that time already quite dogmatic, these scientists and geneticists like David-Reich did not want to risk contradicting consensus. To avoid further conflicts, these scientists like David-Reich suggest the immigrants came from the grass plains, and therefore call it grass plain ancestry, this from north of the Black Sea and the Caspian-Sea, and alternating, he and others claim these arriving people originated from the Yamnaya or Horsemen. Yet, these Yamnaya or Horsemen were not the new Y-DNA haplogroup R1b that would become dominant in Europe and Western Eurasia 4,500 years ago. In fact, Y-DNA haplogroup R1b is dominant across the world today, nor could their culture, in which horses were essential, have expanded without grass plains, this westwards into Western Europe. This all the way west to the most western and northern Atlantic facades. So this 4,500 years ago arriving Y-DNA haplogroup R1b's genetics and ancestry are not explained at all by the suggestion of the grass plain ancestry. This new Y-DNA haplogroup R1b, and certainly the prehistoric root group R1, are not African, and consequently do not come from Africa. This new R1b could only have come from its root R1, that was continuously present only in the Americas since prehistoric times, but obviously this is painfully inconvenient to mention to a by consensus impregnated scientific or other public, so nobody and even no scientist ever mentions or even points at this logical possibility. At least since 47,000 years ago, early modern humans had been arriving from the Americas, landing on the Atlantic facades, especially the European Atlantic facades, simply because certain currents transport more water towards the European Atlantic facades than all the rivers of the world combined transport to all the oceans of the world. Many if not most humans know what the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation or AMOC is, and that it was there and active during human history, in fact active during Earth's history. But when it comes to human history, nearly all humans seem to be hardwired against logic and cannot believe that humans could have made use of these very strong and important currents. Fish show the ancestry. Atlantic bluefin tuna are highly migratory, and frequently swim across the entire Atlantic Ocean between North America and Europe. This migration involves traveling between Western Atlantic spawning grounds, like the Gulf of Mexico, and European feeding areas, and vice versa, demonstrating mixing between the two traditionally fished stocks. Tuna can cover thousands of miles, often following productive currents like the North Atlantic Current, which flows from North America to Europe and even parts of Africa, reaching peak horizontal speeds during these movements. Many whale species cross the Atlantic to Europe, including humpbacks, fin whales, minke whales, and sperm whales, often migrating to feed or breed in northern waters, such as the UK and Ireland. Some orcas, coming from the Americas, also cross the Strait of Gibraltar and are found in European waters like the Mediterranean. There is overwhelming evidence that ancient humans crossed routinely the Atlantic from the Americas to the Atlantic facades of Europe, and into the Mediterranean and Black Sea. We present plenty of this archaeological and genetic evidence in other videos. We briefly mention some evidence later in this video or in the next videos. When the Portuguese and Spanish supposedly discovered the Americas, this around the year 1500, they reported Basques fishing in front of the American coasts. What the Basques did was follow the animals by also making use of the same currents, just like all the animals did along them. Roman historians. Roman historians, including Pliny the Elder, recorded an incident around 60 years in the Common Era or after the birth of Christ, where people described as Indians were shipwrecked on the coast of Germania and subsequently brought to a Roman official. This account is a subject of historical debate, but some theories suggest the castaways were Native Americans who crossed the Atlantic. The long journey in a canoe seems extraordinary, but the North Atlantic conveyor belt is a powerful natural force. But when we dare to suggest that the provingly prehistoric American humans migrated from the Americas to Europe, here and there some viewers describe us or our claims with kind of ugly words. Such extreme hardwiring against nearly all common sense related to human history can only be explained by a collective impregnation against common sense, at least so in the case of human history. It should not be very hard to imagine by means of what so many humans are impregnated or hardwired against logic and correct and inconvenient scientific thinking. When consensus, historians, or even alternative historians are confronted with this inconvenient truth, they most often do not behave as if confronted, but get it out of the way with a range of dubious arguments. One of the arguments, and possibly the most important, is that the group R1b and the American group R1, and in fact all Native Americans descended from R1 fossils found near Lake Baikal in Siberia. But most Native Americans carry Y-DNA-Q, and Y-DNA-Q precedes any Y-DNA-R, and also is older than even the root group R1. So this suggestion is even much more dubious than the out-of-the-grass plain suggestion, that as explained, also does not explain the root historically being present only in the Americas. It is not only the haplogroup R, with its important descendant R1b, that dominates the world by now that is not explained, and not even has its root explained, it is also mtDNA haplogroup X, that forms the early European farmers, having its root in the Americas, which is not explained. It is also Y-DNA haplogroup C that formed the Polynesians, as well as the Aurignacian culture or the first modern human, EMH, culture in Europe and Southwest Asia, of 47,000 years ago, and the Cro-Magnon, all having their root or cradle in the Americas, which is not all explained by consensus, nor by African origin. And in fact nobody is even trying to explain it. Since consensus did not want to doubt its long-time hypothesis, it does not doubt the provided kind of dubious suggestions. In fact, all of the ancient DNA research and results are in a kind of impasse or a nowhere island since 2015 or even before. For you to have at least some reference of the immigrant group R1b of 4,500 years ago, we mentioned that historians refer to at least some of these immigrants who arrived on the Atlantic facades of Europe, this approximately 4,500 years ago as the Bell Beaker culture. We claim that later, long after the Late Bronze Age collapse, roughly all the Celts will descend from them. Historians, or at least ancient DNA researchers and authority David-Reich, claim the immigrant group R1b of 4,500 years ago came from the Grasser Plains, and they therefore call it Grasser Plain ancestry, this originating from north of the Black Sea and north of the Caspian-Sea, and alternating he and others claim the immigrant group R1b to have originated from the Yamnaya or Horsemen. We claim there are too many of them, this for them to originate from the Grasser Plains or from Grasser Plain ancestry, and apart from being too many for them to have originated from the Grasser Plains, they come totally developed and prepared and equipped as warriors, and with their mature cultures, coming out of the blue, this complete with chariots and domesticated horses. So some magician must have pulled them out of his or her hat, this complete with chariots and horses. We are being kind of ironic here. Surprisingly for consensus, but not for us, they are also formed by Y-DNA haplogroup R1b, who also were amongst the later part of the Aurignacian culture or the first modern human, EMH, culture in Europe and Southwest Asia, which thrived from 47,000 years ago onward, and still later some African and European mummies, including also later Egyptian mummies. As said, the Y-DNA haplogroup R1b has its prehistoric root R1 in the Americas, with the Americas still being the only place in the world where haplogroup R1 was present from at least 25,000 years ago until today. In other words, the only place where the root or cradle of 60% of all Europeans and Western Eurasians, as well as nearly all 8 billion modern humans, was present for the last 25,000 years, and this until today, where the Americas, and not any other continent or region, like for instance Africa, Mesopotamia, or the Grasser Plains north of the Black and Caspian Sea. Obviously, all the latter were very important, but not for our dominant and most modern ancestry, DNA, and even cultures and even languages. Furthermore, all that is Indo-European is in fact of ancient and 4,500 years old American origin. This matters a lot, because the corrected human history will explain us why we humans suffered collapses, and in fact extinctions, like for instance the desertification of the Sahara, the Bronze Age collapse, the medieval Black Death, and is a clear warning for what challenges us most of all in modern times. The solution to these challenges, and the way for us modern humans to thrive, are in our ancestry, and more specifically in our ancestry's now long-time forgotten practices. In case you like action over empty promises, and the here proposed initiative or action plan, for either solutions for climate challenges, or for humans to thrive like never before, or a carbon agroforest world, and carbon agroforest economy, or like the quite unique information in this video, please subscribe to this channel, leave a comment, question, or a like on this video. This and other videos of this channel are translated and/or dubbed in over 5 languages, including the official languages of all 9 Amazon forest countries, this for this initiative and plan to succeed, to unite all 8 billion humans across the world, in and through this carbon agroforest action plan and economy.